Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Coco and Daltz, your late-breaking podcast source for entertainment news.
We are all over it.
I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
And I'm especially excited today because this is the first episode of our third season.
What?
We've been doing this for 3 years now.
That is cray.
Especially because we're not getting paid.
That is crayer.
That is really cray.
That's totes cray.
And coming to you with our first episode of the third season, we have our review of The Irishman, as well as some Oscar talk, because the Oscar nominations were announced this morning. The Irishman up for several major awards. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, why are they reviewing The Irishman when it's already been on Netflix for 6 weeks?
They're not thinking that at all.
Because nobody's listening.
No. People don't think when they listen to the podcast. They just put it on because they're related to us or they know us somehow.
They enjoy the dulcet tones of our voices.
And then they go and do their chores and then they come back and it's still going.
So we're reviewing The Irishman today because, A, the Oscar nominations were announced today and we figured it probably would be up for some awards, so we decided to watch it in anticipation of that.
Homework.
And B, it's a 3.5 hour long movie, and we normally have neither the time nor the inclination to watch 3.5 hour long movies. But last night we found ourselves with a big chunk of time with nothing to do. So we said, let's power through this thing tonight. So we ordered some takeout and we powered through it so you don't have to.
This is our commitment to you, listener, that you don't have to do these things. Imagine sitting through a 3.5 hour movie. Just imagine, if you will, sitting in one place. Imagine doing anything for 3.5 hours. And you don't have to do that because we are making these sacrifices for you. We are committing ourselves in your honor.
And speaking of commitment, Daltz did earn valuable relationship points last night because
did I?
Daltz...
Because I cleaned up the dog's poo?
No, that was this morning.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about last night.
All right.
Because Daltz does not like movies about the mafia, nor does he like movies starring Joe Pesci.
Or Robert De Niro. Or Al Pacino.
And last night he watched a 3.5 hour long movie about the mafia that stars Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro and Al Pacino.
And directed by Martin Scorcese.
Also a Daltz favorite.
Not a favorite.
So Daltz earned valuable relationship points last night, and I'm going to make him dinner tonight.
Wow.
Not a euphemism. So.
And listener, I didn't do it for the valuable relationship points. I did it in the name of art.
Because Daltz is a workaholic and he cares more about work than his relationship, I guess.
Wait, what?
You've managed to turn this around. I was saying something nice, and now...
Well, I'm trying to deflect the praise is what I'm trying to do.
Before our listener tunes out,
right.
Daltz, why don't you give us a summary of The Irishman for anybody out there who has not heard of it, hasn't seen it, etc.?
I can do that.
Okay.
So the movie is 3.5 hours long. So when you have a 3.5 hour long movie...
Have we mentioned that it's 3.5 hours long?
So 3.5 hours long. I don't even know how many minutes that is. That's beyond any scope of math that I've ever attained in my life.
That's 210 minutes long.
See, now, you're way smarter than me, Coco. And we didn't rehearse that part, listeners. So the movie, trying to come up with a summary of a 3.5 hour movie might seem at the outset to be a difficult task. However, not for this one, because it's essentially about a hitman who is in the mafia who might have killed Jimmy Hoffa. That's the summary of the movie.
Okay.
And it's tale. So Robert De Niro with his squiggly CGI face in the early going. He plays a young hitman and he's Irish. We're supposed to believe that Robert De Niro is Irish. He gets enlisted by some mafia members and they take him under their wing, namely Joe Pesci, who is fantastic in this, by the way. They take him under his wing and they develop him into a cold-blooded killer because he was fresh out of the army. So he had killed some people in his day in the army, as people want to do in wars. So this is where it goes from there. He develops, he turns into a killer, and then they say to him, hey, keep an eye on that Jimmy Hoffa guy because he's a little bit of a loose cannon. Can you just sort of hang around with him and make sure nobody tries to shoot him and be his bodyguard and that sort of thing?
I have a question.
Oh, all right.
Not to interrupt you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is Hoffa an Irish last name as well?
Well, see, in the movie, I wasn't clear as to what ethnic background he identified with, because he
guess I
seems
could-
to make fun of Italians, he makes fun of Jewish people, he makes fun of Irish people, and he speaks about all of them equally in derogatory terms.
Because then, you know, if Hoffa is Irish, which I am looking up on Google right now, then the name of the movie could be
About
have
Jimmy
a double
Hoffa.
meaning, like about Frank Sheeran, Robert De Niro's character, and Jimmy
Right.
Hoffa, Al Pacino's character.
See, you gave this a lot more thought than I did, and I should have gone to the rehearsal this morning about this, but...
Okay, well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, so please continue with your
No,
your
I was
summary.
pretty much done, is that Robert De Niro is in charge of Jimmy Hoffa, and they become close friends, and you'll never guess what happens at the end. So that's essentially the story. Jimmy Hoffa, protected by Robert De Niro, befriended by Robert De Niro, and maybe betrayed by Robert De Niro. And it's essentially the union movement of the age and how it came to rise. And Jimmy Hoffa was a very popular guy in those days. And of course, the story is, for those who are younger than Coco, you might not know who Jimmy Hoffa is, or you might just know that he disappeared. But he was a union guy who famously disappeared without a trace, and nobody really seems to know where he is. Robert De Niro is playing the potential hitman who killed Jimmy Hoffa.
So according to Wikipedia, which I know is accurate all the time, Jimmy Hoffa's father is of German descent, but his mother is of Irish ancestry.
Oh,
So The
so
Irishman
maybe.
could be a play on both Hoffa and Sheeran.
It could
I
be.
think we could basically completely leave out whether De Niro's character legit killed Jimmy Hoffa in real life, because I don't think that really matters to the story. I said last night, I think that's the hook of the story, and if it didn't have the Hoffa connection, people wouldn't care about it.
Right.
Because, spoiler alert, I thought the movie was pretty boring.
Ooh,
But
we haven't talked about what you thought about the movie, so
right,
I'm
but,
interested.
But well, because we hadn't gotten to that part of the podcast yet.
Because we had to rest after watching a 3.5-hour movie. I had to lie down on the floor. As a matter of fact, I don't want to interrupt you, but fair play and everything.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I was able to sit through a 3.5-hour movie is because yesterday morning I totally tweaked my back, and I actually couldn't get up.
We were actually supposed to go bowling last night instead of watching The Irishman, but then Daltz was laid up in a heating pad with, booze and CBD gummies. So that's how we ended up with like a 4-hour block of time with nothing to do. It was like, well, we were supposed to go bowling, but now
I
we
was
can't.
healing.
So,
It
yeah.
was all in the name of healing.
Yeah. So I think we can discount whether De Niro's character in real life actually assassinated Jimmy Hoffa, because I don't think it's really actually germane to the story.
But is the Irishman a real person? Or is he an amalgam, or is he a fictional character?
So I should have read it again before we did this podcast, but when the movie came out and everybody was talking about this, I did read an article on Slate about everything that was, like, whether he actually killed Jimmy Hoffa or not. And
Like
it
a
seems,
fact check of the movie?
yeah, and it seems like Frank Sheeran was actually a real person.
Okay.
But the general consensus is that he did not actually kill Jimmy Hoffa.
And Frank Sheeran, the real person, is still around, too.
Oh, is he?
Well,
Oh,
I thought he was. Because I thought around the time of this movie, there was talk of who this guy was and everything like that.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
All right, so let's just not talk about that.
So what did you think of the movie?
Well, I want to hear what you thought, because you just dropped a bomb that you said you thought it was boring. So
So I'm not Daltz, which I know I already said once, but I'm saying it again because I
Which
mean
is a
it.
good thing.
I don't mind mafia movies. I tend to enjoy them. The Godfather is one of my all-time favorite movies, along with Jaws. I will
Which
watch.
is not a mafia movie, by the way, for those who haven't seen it. Jaws.
Oh, Jaws. Okay, yeah. I was like, what are you talking
And it's also not a James Bond villain movie either.
No, unfortunately.
Right.
So I will watch The Godfather pretty much anytime it comes on TV.
Also a 3.5-hour long
Also,
movie.
but it doesn't seem like a 3.5 hour long movie because it's actually interesting.
I really like The Godfather.
So I like mafia movies. I did think this one was kind of boring.
Wow.
It was very plotting. The
Right.
pace was really uneven. The only time I was actually really caught up in it and I thought it was suspenseful and paced well is when the decision was made to kill Jimmy Hoffa.
Right.
And then things picked up and it was more suspenseful. I mean, if I wasn't really around, like I was born after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, but I knew who he was. I didn't know what.
So you didn't do it.
I did not do it.
Okay.
I wouldn't discount several members of my family from having done it if they had the
Wow.
opportunity, but
right.
but it clearly did not
Let me know
happen.
who that is next time we're talking about that.
But yeah, so I knew who he was. I knew the general story of his disappearance. I didn't know that he was apparently such a huge, massive deal. But it didn't. It was, like you said last night, it was basically a character story of De Niro's character, a character study of his character. But I didn't care. Like, I don't care why this one guy became a gangster and got recruited by like the Philly crime family. Like, I don't. And then after he kills Jimmy Hoffa, like, it's over and you're like, oh, that's it? And now he's spending the last 45 minutes of the movie picking out his casket. And I understand, like you said, he's basically spending the rest of his life living with what he's done and seeking absolution from priests and just dealing with the fallout of his life. But I thought it was like really, really boring. Normally I like Scorcese movies. I love The Departed, but
There's a lot of violence in this too. Let's not give people the perception that it's all storyline and no action. I mean, there is some heavy duty violence and some pretty graphic scenes. Not as graphic as Scorsese has been in the past.
Right, but if you've seen any kind of like mob movie, then you've seen people get whacked.
Right,
you know,
and you kind of expect that, right?
Right, totally, because you know it is what it is.
Right, it's a mafia movie about people getting killed.
Right,
and
now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and the thing with his development at the end is what I thought it was intended irony for that he had killed all these people, and then the FBI or whoever it was comes to grill him when he's in his wheelchair and he's a doddering old man, and they're saying everybody else is gone. Who are you protecting?
Right.
Like, they're all dead. And I think that was sort of an emphasis on this is the worst torture he could possibly have had. Is his wife died young, and then his family has estranged from him. His kids don't talk to him, that kind of thing. Don't want to be associated with him. And here he is all alone. And it's almost like, to me, I was trying to read a deeper sense of this and say, he's being tortured. This is his fate. Is that all his confreres are gone and all his enemies are gone. It's just him.
Right.
And the last scene sort of, and I don't want to say it and describe it, but it's
been out for 6 weeks. You can do that.
It sort of emphasizes that ending, is that it's a very stark, not like him getting blown up in a car, nothing spectacular. Like, it's just kind of an ending to an everyday life. And I think that's painful for a character like Robert De Niro's in this movie, is that he kind of wants to go out in a blaze of glory. So anyway, you were going to say something.
Well, going along with that though, I did think the performances were all incredibly good.
Yeah.
De Niro, not like very kind of understated, but like especially,
which I loved,
especially when the decision was made to kill Jimmy Hoffa, like you could see like the torment and the conflict in him without him having to even say anything, really. Like, you could just see it on his face.
Yeah, he was tortured. Or was it his face, or was it his CGI face?
Well, I'll also say
who's doing the acting
the
here?
CGI did not bother me. There was one scene right at the very beginning with him and Joe Pesci, and I was like, ooh, those aren't their real faces. But then...
Is that the one where they had like the spirals on their cheeks and it went all pixely and stuff like that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a dead giveaway.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the CGI didn't bother me. He was so good at holding it in and just conveying with his expressions the torment, like the inner torment. I would have given him an Oscar nomination for lead over Pacino for supporting.
Me too.
Pacino's Pacino. He's,
he played Al Pacino.
He's a master, but he's
with a Chicago accent, essentially.
Yeah, you're getting every Pacino performance for the past 30 years. Like, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. Like, it was just him raging and just being over the top. But he's Pacino, so it is what it is. But Harvey Keitel was good.
Yep.
Joe Pesci was fantastic. Yep. Props to the Irishman makeup department for making Bobby Cannavale look unattractive. Like, they managed to turn a hottie into a naughty. So they
gave him a 5 head.
Yeah, they totally did. The performances were great. The CGI was good. I don't know.
It's not the sum of its parts. I think it could have been an hour and a half shorter.
It totally could have been.
If it had been a 2-hour movie, maybe even 2:15. Let's edge on the side of giving Martin Scorsese a little bit more time. But like, if it's been 2 hours, 2:15, I think it would have been worth it. But man, my backside was numb after watching that whole movie, and we stopped it too to
we
eat.
To eat and let the dog out, and
Took
go
a
to
break.
the bathroom, and
Is this the new Netflix? Like, is this the new way that they're going to go about it, because I was looking it up while you were talking. I actually was listening, but I was multitasking.
Sorry that I'm boring.
Yeah, I had to entertain myself because I wasn't listening at all.
Like the woman is just droning on, and you're
sort of like our
oh,
listener
God.
right now.
Yeah, uh-huh.
But it reminded me of when we talked about Roma last year, and Roma was another Oscar-nominated Netflix movie, and we were in the same boat, I think, on that as well. Is it just was so plotting, so deliberate, and felt so long. Now that wasn't nearly 3.5 hours long. It was a long movie, but it was like,
I think that was about 2.5.
It was a traditionally length movie that felt a lot longer. This one felt every minute of 3.5 to me. It didn't feel like it was 5, but it was 3.5 hours long. But I agree with what you said about the acting. I'm not as you mentioned off the top, I'm not a Joe Pesci fan. I'm not a fan of anybody in this movie, actually.
And I love De Niro. He's a national treasure.
And I'm not.
I love him.
I'm not a fan of his at all. And I thought he was fantastic. And I thought and Joe Pesci, I thought, as annoying as he was in the Lethal Weapon movies,
they F you in the drive-thru.
He was so understated in this, and he was. I was going into the movie, I was thinking, how are they going to make him the kingpin guy? Like, I'm not seeing that at all. And he came out of retirement and he owned this part. I mean, he was, especially at the end there where he was manipulating De Niro's character. He was very cold and calculating, and I thought that was really well done. And like you said, De Niro's playing of inner torture was really good. It was, and again, I'm not sure how much the CGI helped him out there, but it was almost like he had to pass gas and he couldn't. Like, he was just in the car and he was like, oh, geez, what about, what's happening here?
Well, I think the CGI helped because they weren't trying to de-age him down to like 1970s Godfather Part 2 strapping young De Niro.
Taxi driver De Niro.
Right. Like he was still clearly like 40s and 50s and up De Niro.
Yeah.
So I think
he still had some wrinkles.
Yeah. So I think the fact that they didn't have to do such heavy lifting with the CGI like helped that out a lot. But I mean, still, like by the time he killed Jimmy Hoffa,
what?
He was, old enough that I don't know exactly how much CGI was really involved in that. Like maybe they just like put some Grecian formula on him and called it a day, like maybe that was his real face.
Well, and there was a lot of talk before the movie and after the release of the movie of all this. Like, De Niro said, I'm not going to have any dots on my face, and I don't want to stand in front of a green screen and all this sort of stuff. He's like, you got to come up with a better solution. And then a lot of people are talking about how leading edge that technology is now, and how it's going to help people, older actors act as younger people and that sort of thing. So, I mean, the CGI was definitely leading edge there, but he still had to act. I mean, he still had to do those subtle winces, and he was a tortured character. I mean, I really identified with him, even though he's a cold-blooded killer. He was, and that's the point of this movie. That's the point of a good movie and a good well acted and well scripted movie. Is that I want to like this guy, and I did. I felt bad for him, and at the end, I felt bad for him. I mean, I wasn't going to cry or anything like that, but I felt bad with the ending and the way it happened, and just this guy he just took the wrong turn and came into the wrong restaurant, and the rest of his life just took a turn. And there was also narration in the movie too, but it was sporadic.
Yeah, I did like actually that.
From him, he was the narrator.
Any time like a mob person came up, like they would flash
what happened to them.
What happened to this person. Like I did like that.
I like that too. It was kind of jarring, but it was also eventually because you didn't know when it was going to show up. Right. And then all of a sudden it showed up, and there was a couple of really interesting parts of that too. And that was, I think that was through that was the through thread for me about at the end where De Niro's all by himself. You see that all these people that he's encountered are gone. Right.
And they all died like in the 70s and 80s too. Like there was one guy, there was one guy who it said he was loved by everybody and he died of natural causes in like 2001, but everybody else was like gunned down in parking lots in like 1982, you know? So
like
it was
long after the movie takes place.
Right.
And there was even a Joseph Kennedy mention as to when he passed away, because there's some interesting crossover there, which I know has been a conspiracy, along a conspiracy on how JFK died and how Robert Kennedy died and how Jimmy Hoffa died, and it was sort of like a war between the government and the mafia and all that sort of stuff. It's just, that was really interesting to me. I mean, I'm not sure how much of it is accurate or anywhere close to true, but that was the interesting stuff to me. It was the crossover with pop cultural references, which I think there could have been more of those. The settings were really good. The diner, the cars, everything was all really good. That's, and I don't know if I talked about this before, but I'm always amazed at how really nice the cars were. And in the olden days, you never had any rusty cars. You never had any cars that had driven through mud or had cracks in the windshields from stones coming off trucks or anything like that. Every vehicle in these period movies has cars in pristine condition, like the red Ford. I think they were driving around at one point. It's like, man, you could look at your reflection in the hood of that car. Like that, they've been waxing that sucker for 3 days.
Right. I will say, I know there was a lot of talk right when the movie came out about there were basically no women in this at all. Like Anna Paquin was the biggest name of all the female characters, and she had probably maybe half a dozen lines tops.
Well, and her younger character and her barely had any lines. They were in a lot of scenes, and the focus was on them, but they barely spoke.
And the other female characters too, like barely spoke, and it was noticeable that no women in this movie have lines whatsoever, but I wasn't too bothered by it because I'm like, are we going to develop like this female character and now we're going to add another half hour onto this movie? Like, I'm cool. I'm cool with just De Niro and Pesci like chewing scenery. Like that's fine.
I will say that Hoffa's wife was a strong female character in the movie. She wasn't in there very much, but she was probably the strongest character. The other ones were just sort of
background noise,
accessories.
Yeah,
which is probably the way it was in those days because of the culture and of the how to put it, like the sexism in those days.
Right, like there was a lot of the movie was taken up with De Niro and Pacino and their wives taking a road trip from Philly to Detroit.
Right. And
the wives are in the back seat just kind of nattering softly about whatever, like they don't really say anything of any importance. Like they don't have any real lines because it's all De Niro and Pesci talking. And then if they get any lines at all, it's like, ooh, yeah, let's go to dinner. I'm starving. Just completely unimportant stuff. Right. So it was extremely noticeable that there were not any major female characters in this movie. But
I think that's okay.
I wasn't bothered by it.
I think if it's a portrayal of the day, then you don't want to introduce something that's not there. Like, I don't think there was any...
You're not going to have a lady mafia hitman, like, taking out Jimmy Hoffa.
Right.
You know?
I mean, if that's the intention of the movie from the get-go, then that'll be fine. But if it's somebody who's on the side saying that they're, this crazy, like if it's part of the, in a movie such as this, which has so many historical touch points, you're not going to fabricate something that wouldn't make any sense contextually, right? You're not going to introduce like a female hitman or hit woman when there's no such thing in history.
What was that? Oh, that was my wine bottle stopper that came out.
What is going on?
Well, I guess I better finish off this bottle then if the cork isn't going to stay in.
That's also a sign that we should move on and talk about the Oscars, perhaps, that we've dealt with the Irishman enough.
I'll drink to that.
So the Oscars nominations came out this morning, in the morning of this podcast.
They did. The Irishman was nominated for Picture, Director, and 2 supporting actor nods for Pesci and Pacino. Not a lead actor nod for De Niro, which, like I said, I would have given him a nod over Pacino. That's just me. Neither one of them is going to win. They've both got Oscars, so
right.
They're not going to win, but I think deservedly, in terms of deserving it, De Niro takes the prize.
Well, in looking at the best actor categories, so you got Leonardo DiCaprio.
He was not going to win because he just won a couple of years ago.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You've
Which,
got Antonio...
if you haven't listened to our review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you should go back through our archives and listen to it because... Spoiler alert, we didn't love it.
No, not a good movie. So what we're going to do is we're also going to talk about the Oscars after the Oscars.
We are.
We're going to have a special post-Oscar wrap podcast.
We're really hoping, because the Oscars air in early February, so we've got about 3 to 4 weeks between now and then, if you're listening in real time. We're really hoping that several of the Best Picture nominees appear on Netflix and Amazon between now and then, because there are 9 and we have seen 3. So we would like to have more comprehensive. This is how we would have voted if we were Oscar voters nominated.
So the Academy,
coverage.
if you're listening, send us our
we
copies,
need screeners.
please. We need some screeners.
We've got a DVD player, don't we?
We do.
Okay.
We have an old-fashioned disc player that plays DVDs.
Okay. Please send us our screeners, Academy. That'd be awesome.
Do they even do that anymore? Do they just send you a file you can download?
I mean, I'm down with that too.
Right?
Yeah, we could do that too. Whichever version is best for you, Academy, do that.
And so they're going to send us one of those laser discs because they got a whole
from the 90s.
Because they got like a warehouse full of them and they can't get rid of them, right? Those RCA laser discs or whatever they are.
Well, if you are doing electronic files, it's cocoanddalts@gmail.com.
Right, it is.
Again, that is cocoanddalts@gmail.com. All one word, and is spelled out, not the ampersand.
So I was just to finish the point on the best actor.
Sorry.
That's okay. The other nominees are Antonio Banderas, Adam Driver, Joaquin Phoenix, and Jonathan Pryce for The Two Popes.
Which is on my watch list, but you do not seem interested in watching that.
No, I'm not much into the whole religion aspect of it.
There goes my wine. Yeah.
We're picking that up in the podcast.
Yeah.
So looking at the other nominees for, I don't know if I would put that cork back on there.
Okay. Yeah, you're probably right.
I don't. So the favorite there is Joaquin Phoenix. So they're saying that he's going to totally own because of the Joker. So I'm not sure where Robert De Niro would have stood a chance there, but I agree that he should have been in there.
Well, I don't think he would have won, but I think he
should
have been nominated.
Yeah,
you know,
and maybe he was number 6. Who knows? Because there's only 5. Unlike the Best Picture award, where you can have 97 pictures in there apparently. Best Picture and Best Actor and Best Actress, etc. Just 5.
And then Scorcese.
Best Director.
Probably not going to get it. I'm going to go out on a limb and say neither Pesci nor Pacino is going to win. I think it's Brad Pitt's year. He's been really, really campaigning for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it might be a sense of like this is his time because he's been in Hollywood now for 30 years. He's a very good producer. You know, he's been an actor. This might be his year. I thought he was really good in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He was pretty much the highlight of that movie for me. Because,
he was the only watchable thing in that movie.
Because, like we said, we did not like that movie. So,
well, and I think that the Academy doesn't care about that, and they're gonna run up Quentin Tarantino's probably gonna be Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Movie. You're gonna have Brad Pitt is gonna win.
Yeah, overdue for Tarantino after Pulp Fiction, which didn't win in '94 because Forrest Gump won in '94.
Yeah, I think that was a great movie, but I think that he's been a little bit overrated since then. So, and this falls right into that category. But what do I know? I'm only Joe consumer.
And we don't get paid for this podcast, so we
Not
don't
yet.
count as critics either. So
well, everybody's a critic.
Everybody is
right?
a critic.
A critic.
Yeah. So you got anything else you want to say? Or are you all good?
I think you're awesome. That's what I want to say.
You're just trying to score more valuable relationship points.
I think this podcast is all about saying how many relationship points I have. So if you're keeping score at home, listener, please send me a ledger to cocoanddalts@gmail.com. Send me a spreadsheet.
And please send me some more wine because I just poured the last of it into my glass.
And so they're playing us out. The producer in this year's podcast is very stringent about wrapping things up.
In a timely fashion.
He's playing us off again, as will happen at the Oscars. There will be many people played off, even though there's no host. So, for another episode of the podcast, thanks for joining us.
For year 3.
Year 3, I'm still not Coco.
And I'm still not Dots.